Welcome to Retro Radio Rumble, where two guys like to talk about all things retro video games from the Super Nintendo, and other various video games from the 80s and 90s. And I am Nierroh.
I am Dennys.
And yeah, we're just two guys who love playing and talking about video games in our free time. So figured why not, talk about it to an audience and hopefully create something that other people also, enjoy surrounding retro video games. So, the goal is pretty much to take three video games from a certain era, starting with the Super Nintendo for the first few episodes here. Take the top 25. I think starting from the top of the list, we decided, and discussing their history, background, our experience with said games, and then judging harshly and rating them very harshly on presentation, gameplay, and music. So using those three criteria, we hope to kind of pinpoint a spot on the list, whether we believe that game belongs where it sits on the most common top 25. I ran through places like IGN, Den of Geek, kind of other various blog sites to kind of find a conglomerate top 25 for these consoles. So
Oh yeah, all the big guys.
indeed. So let's get into it. I think the first game, which I find on the top of many lists, is Super Metroid
Oh yeah.
for the SNES. And Super Metroid was developed and published by Nintendo. Nintendo R&D1 specifically, which is Yoshio Sakamoto. And you'll have to forgive me on a lot of these Japanese names. I might butcher them. And for people listening who actually know what they're supposed to sound like, I am so sorry, because I'm probably going to butcher many of them. But yeah, so written and directed by Yoshio Sakamoto and produced by Makoto Kano. A company called Intelligent Systems, which was a close Nintendo affiliate company, also responsible for Fire Emblem, Paper Mario, and WarioWare, handled the programming. So these guys, Yoshio Sakamoto and Makoto Kano, were also responsible for the original Metroid on the NES that came out before.
Oh, yeah. I believe they're also the same team that developed the Game Boy.
R&D1 is the same one that developed the Game Boy?
Yep. In fact, I think they released the Metroid 2 game on there
Samus
to kind of push
Returns.
that system.
Nice. So yeah, Nintendo splits up their teams, the R&D1, R&D2, 3, 4. Some of them handle hardware, some of them do more games. And I mean, that kind of helped them stay agile, have different teams working on different stuff at different times. So yeah, this game was released in 1994 in Japan and North America and PAL, I believe, simultaneously. So yep, it was March 19th, 1994 in Japan, April 18th in North America, and then the PAL regions in July 28th. So this game for me, I actually didn't play this game until quite a few years after its release. I didn't get this game as a kid. I don't really have the nostalgia factor of this game, so I may be a little biased as far as the rating. But I mean, I'll go ahead and say, this is a fantastic game. I've played through this game a few times now, recently for the show, and then for the first time maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I can see why it gets all the hype. I mean, this game is just oozes atmosphere. It's one of the darker games, I feel, on Nintendo. I mean, not many games have an opening sequence where there's dead bodies.
Dead scientists.
Yeah, I was surprised by that personally.
Well, I believe when they originally did it on the Nintendo, it was Nintendo's attempt to create an adult-themed game compared to their Mario games, Legend of Zelda. They wanted something that was darker and moodier, and I believe he was inspired by the film Aliens, actually, by James Cameron.
I can definitely see that. You can see the H.R. Geiger sort of kind of vibe going on there.
Which is pretty heavy back then.
For sure.
For a Nintendo game especially.
I mean, there's no like aliens exploding out of anyone's chest in this game, but
No.
but they definitely touch on those darker vibes. I mean, everything from like the atmosphere, the music, the levels, and the sounds just kind of ooze that kind of like desolate, darker vibe, you know?
Well, so kind of like you, I didn't play this when it initially came out. I believe it was one of the later titles on the SNES as well. But so I got really into Nintendo at a young age. I was born in the early '80s, and when I played Metroid for the first time, the original one, it was a little bit too complex for me. But my neighbor with the Super Nintendo had gotten it, and I went over there and I would watch him play, and he had found secrets, which was like a really cool thing in that game that it hid everything. There's so many items you can get early on in the game that are beneficial, that are hidden, and that kind of principle has been applied to a lot of the more recent games now, which is kind of cool to see it becoming meta. But when I first started watching my buddy play that game, I couldn't believe how cool you could make your character, if that makes sense. The fact that I think that game more or less, that along with Legend of Zelda, started the progression system to where you get an item that allows you access to the next area. And Nintendo as a whole was very innovative and revolutionary in that sense that they made genre-defining games.
Oh, dude, I mean, the Metroidvania genre is totally like a huge genre in games now because of games like Super Metroid and Super Castlevania, or actually, I think more Castlevania Symphony of the Night was the one
Absolutely,
that
which
people
is
think about.
the best title in my opinion as far as the
Yeah,
Castlevanias.
when we get to our PlayStation era, we're definitely going to be talking about that one, I'm sure. But yeah, to say again to that, you know, Nintendo kind of being genre defining and creating that legacy. I mean, there's so many popular Metroidvania games in the indie market now. I mean, like Hollow Knight is one that comes to mind. That's just a fantastic game. I
Well,
mean,
when I think of the term pacing to a game, I feel that Super Metroid has the most ideal pacing in the sense that if you're veteran to the game, you can progress faster. And if you are not, you progress slower. It's just knowing where things are because they're always in the same spot each run through. So there's certain go-to spots when I play that game. Same with a Legend of Zelda, which is later on the list. That I go, there's go-to spots that I have because I know the secret already there from playing it before, and it's kind of cool to learn a game to the point where you can break it almost. And I feel like that game established that style of genre.
definitely. I mean, talking on the secrets, like last time I played through that game, I did a walkthrough and got a map online that shows you where all those secrets are. And like to be able to find all those on your own is just, I mean, that's like a daunting task to me. I mean, getting all the energy tanks and finding all the
Oh
rockets, it's like
yeah.
you just shoot one random spot up in the ceiling and it's like, oh, there's missiles up there. Like, that's cool.
Well, what was cool about that was before the advent of the internet, finding secrets was incredibly difficult in games. You'd had to rely on subscriptions to magazines like Nintendo Power Game Pro back then,
Hmm, definitely.
and you'd have to wait, or from older brothers finding them, of friends, you know. So when I used to go to my friend's house and he'd play, there were secrets that he found that I knew about only because I watched him play it before I purchased the game myself. And in
Hmm.
fact, I don't know if you did you play the original Metroid?
I did, yes.
So the original Metroid, I got really into it. Like I said, I was a little too young at the time, but that was when I revisited probably when PlayStation came out. I started going back to some of my older games because I wasn't quite ready for the 3D shift yet. I
Hmm.
thought that PlayStation at the 32-bit mark had just started really creating fantastic, visually stunning 2D side scrollers. And I was sad to see the genre shift to 3D games at that point because I thought they had just hit a point to where they were making them amazing. Like the original Rayman looks like a visual masterpiece. It looks like a painting. And then they jump ship and started jumping to 3D games, and you could see the graphics drop off to the polygon. At the time, they didn't have quite the architecture.
That's like the interesting thing about the hardware, you know. I mean, end of life, Super Nintendo, they've mastered that hardware. I mean, even coming from the Nintendo to the Super Nintendo, like you see those games, end of life Nintendo. Like, what's the game you had me play, Moon Crystal, which I
Yeah,
believe was a Japanese only game. We should definitely go over that when we do our kind of like hidden treasures
that's a cool one.
episode, because that's such a cool one that really showcases like what the NES hardware can do. But I mean, at the end of life there, they started really trying to showcase what, the 16-bit consoles can do, stuff like Mode
Absolutely.
7 graphics and all sorts of crazy stuff. And I think that's really prevalent, with the N64 and the PS1, the 3D consoles. I
Yes.
mean, they were making that push towards 3D graphics, and it was new territory. So like no one really did it that great.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the but like the 2D games are masterpieces.
They were. Symphony of the Night is a prime example. That game looks amazing, and that was a PlayStation title. Probably, and then I mean, from that point, they moved into 3D territory.
I
But
mean, even Metroid's gone 3D. I mean, Metroid Prime, which is another very
yes,
popular kind of trilogy in the long running series. I mean, the Metroid series is a pretty big staple for Nintendo. I mean, you have Samus Aran, or actually, I learned it was Samus Aran recently. I
oh,
mean,
really?
I could be wrong, but I heard another YouTuber say Samus Aran. But anyways, I mean, my biggest memory of Metroid, and this is gonna show like how little I knew of Metroid in my youth, is from Super Smash Brothers.
All right.
Like, Samus Aran was this character in Super Smash Brothers. I was like, that's a cool kind of,
Absolutely.
armored fighter. Um, and I didn't really visit the Metroid series until after, the N64 had been out and I'd played Super Smash Bros. But I mean, it's a huge staple for Nintendo at this point when you have a character in Smash, games on every single console except for, I believe, I think was Other M Wii only, or did that come out on Wii U? I'm
I
not
think,
sure.
yeah, I'm not sure as well.
I didn't play much Wii U. I think, the Wii U being the bastard child of Nintendo's past. you
The
know.
the Virtual Boy.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Along with the Virtual Boy, which I mean
What?
is way cooler in my opinion than the Wii U. Because this is a retro podcast. We can talk about the Wii U and in
Yes.
the future. But anyways, yeah, what I mean to say is Metroid is like, kind of a huge series for Nintendo, and even to the point where they also moved into that 3D territory, and I think they did it really well. I mean, those Metroid Prime games, we can talk about those in our GameCube segment more in detail, but I mean, they're widely loved, critically acclaimed games.
Yeah, well, so I feel Nintendo, what they really did and the way they dominated, and Metroid being a prime example, no pun intended, was is their ability. What they do is they take a game, they design a genre and they create a game style, and then they almost redo it every single console they come out with, and they continually more or less take the same fundamentals for that game each time and just do it with the new upgraded systems, and it
hmm
always works. Because if you look at Super Metroid, what I felt made that game crush was the fact that they took everything that was awesome from the first game and made it better and made it bigger and doubled. Like, so the boss fights, much more elaborate puzzle solvers, the getting abilities to get to the new areas and then using those abilities. That is a staple of Nintendo's game design and just in general,
And that's
even
like the
applied to.
whole Super Nintendo moniker, right? They took these games, you made Super Metroid, Super Mario. Like
Exactly.
they took everything and they took it to the next level. And
Well, with
like
the
with
GameCube, same
Oh
thing.
yeah, and I mean it's like the notorious Nintendo innovation, like most of the time they really succeed on those innovations, and
Absolutely.
it's like you're saying there, Super Metroid was Metroid, like, to the next level.
It was so, and also in story. So the first game, you're Samus, and she's sent to kill out the Metroids, a race of aliens that can suck the life out of things, right?
hmm
So they send her, and then this other species is trying to steal that alien species so they can use it as a weapon, and you're basically sent out to kill everyone. So Super Metroid, what's weird about that game, a little fun fact is. The beginning of that game, the initial part is from the second game, which was released exclusively on Game Boy
hmm
only. So a lot of people that didn't, especially when Game Boy first came out, it was very expensive, and a lot of people didn't make the portable jump, which ultimately became one of their greatest selling systems of all time. But
hmm
the people that couldn't make the jump, the game starts off with the ending of the second game, with you saving, the one last specimen. Instead of destroying the entire species of Metroid, you decide to keep one and bring it back, and then
hmm
you leave, and within seconds of leaving, you come back to the station, everyone's killed, and the main bad person, Ridley.
Ridley, yeah, space pirate leader Ridley.
Which is, yeah, space pirate, exactly. They're
Hmm.
stealing it to use it as a bioweapon, essentially. And
Hmm.
you have to go back and it's retelling essentially the first game, you know? It's
Hmm.
retelling the story with all the upgraded stuff. And to the point where, I mean, you know, I don't know if it's a spoiler alert anymore, if anyone
Dude,
hasn't
it's
played.
so long now that I feel like and most things we say about these games should be pretty common knowledge. I mean,
So
if
the
you come
ending
across
is,
anything too big, we can always do spoiler alert. But
yeah,
I mean
yeah,
that these are old. This is the retro video game. This isn't no
yes,
Game of Thrones spoilers here. So,
no. Well, so the ending of that game is epic
hmm,
because even after it's the same principle they used for the Tomb Raider the reboot with even Dark Souls, where you continually make your character better and progress by either gaining new moves, gaining the ability of strength. But that principle, all the way to the end, you get to the final boss and you're still not strong enough to defeat it. In fact, you waste all of your ammo, your energy bars are just getting drained, and then to find that no matter what you do, you are designed to die at that part.
and I
Except
love that
for,
in games. I absolutely love
oh,
that.
well, that makes you, because the way a boss fight, you know, should feel is that you're putting yourself against something that you can't beat, like a David versus Goliath. You have the odds against you, and the fact that you beat him makes you feel like a superhero, and
Yeah.
that's the exhilaration you get from these games. And that game, just having everything accessible, is amazing because when you find yourself seeking out the boosters and the energy tanks. You try to find those things so that you can destroy the creatures better, and it becomes a addictive drug to
The
get more
steady
and more
drip of
powerful.
progress.
Yeah, it's just you get more and more powerful, and that feeling drives you all the way to the end to where you get defeated again. To only be saved by the creature that you saved initially, and that's
Hmm.
such a goosebumps moment on your skin because you realize that this creature sacrificed as you did for it. It
Hmm.
returns the favor for you to kill, you know, Mother Brain, and it's I just remember the completion of that game, almost bringing a tear to your eye, and
Hmm.
then make you want to replay it again because now second time you know the power that you can possess, and you know how to get the stuff now
And you
because
know
you've
where the
done it.
secrets are too.
It's
You found a
amazing.
bunch of different secrets to be stronger and better.
And
I
they
mean,
even give you an item in the game that allows you to find secrets, which is cool.
hmm,
And which I thought I had crushed secrets until I got that item. Went back
right.
and realized I didn't find anything.
Definitely. I mean, I think that goes to show that game just like it reeks emotion and it reeks just atmosphere. I mean, let's talk about the opening sequence. So, we talked about earlier, there's the narration kind of leading into the events of Metroid 2, finding, like saving that last Metroid as it's, kind of like that cute, sad puppy that Samus
Yeah.
Aran finds and she can't really bring herself to end it. She shows some mercy and takes it back and then there's a sequence of the scientists and the research facility just dead on the floor,
Yeah.
just beeping of machinery, and you know Samus climbs down and there's nothing going on, right? That intro sequence is cool because there's absolutely no enemies. You just kind of climb down into the research facility and you find the dark corridor where there's dead scientists and the Metroid's gone, and then the next room is the Metroid sitting there, and you're like, oh, there you are, and then all of a sudden Ridley just like
Yeah.
appears out of nowhere, and you're like, oh crap, and they just throw you into that fight, and that's another thing I love that Nintendo does is they take those kind of like uber boss fights towards the end of the game, and they show you right at the beginning, like, hey, check this
Yeah.
guy out.
It's that principle went all the way into even if you look at Assassin's Creed with Altair, where he's stripped of all of his stuff in the beginning, beaten
Hmm.
down. That's a great it's kind of like a redemption tale throughout the story, which is what makes you I feel like get attached to that character.
Hmm. So yeah, once you pump Ridley with a few bullets, there's the whole sequence, just like the ending of everything. Once again, spoiler alert: you have to escape the research facility because it's exploding. But on your way out, there's enemies now because the space pirates have come. So you're actually like fighting space pirates on the way out where there was nothing on the way in. And I think that's such a clever way to start a game. And then you try to blast off, and then eventually find yourself on the planet Zebes, or I think it's
Yeah.
pronounced. I always said Zebes personally,
Yeah,
but
same here.
I saw it was Z E HBEH Zebe Zebes. I don't know how
Well,
I'm
so when
saying
you
that,
land
but
on it, it's raining. It's you can tell it's like a planet that possesses things that are deadly, and
hmm,
they just really did a good job of that. And I was always afraid of aliens, maybe as a kid in games because that they could be anything.
Oh
And
yeah,
in that game,
definitely.
they're horrifying.
They did a good job, man. Some of the bosses are like really scary looking.
Hmm.
Like Crockmire is really scary, dude. That gave me nightmares even when I played that in my early 20s. Like this is a
Yeah,
scary monster.
yeah. Some of them are hard too, and some it's kind of like we were talking about their genre defining, but like Mega Man series where you had to have the particular item for the. They're almost the same principle, just slightly shifted. Same with Legend of Zelda, just
Hmm.
slightly shifted because they're all designed for you to progress slowly and become more powerful.
Hmm. And I think Metroid, you said pacing earlier. I think Metroid, yes, definitely does the pacing really well. Like you get new items and new abilities at such a like good rate. You always feel more like badass, and when you kind of hit a wall and you finally get that next power up that lets you proceed to the next area, you're just like, all right, like this breathes more life into this playthrough, and I'm excited to keep going.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, I think we've definitely talked a lot about the impact of this game. Let's move on to some ratings. So, I mean, we've talked about all this stuff already, but be kind of more concise. So, like presentation wise, I mean, graphics. Like I think like the pixel art and the sprites, like the dark palette, like they just nail what they're going for. I mean, you are scared. Like when we're talking horror on a 2D platform, like this is a scary game. Like
It
they
is.
took that, this two-dimensional pixel art and they made you afraid. So, graphics wise, I think this game just nails what it's going for sure.
Absolutely, I would have to agree. I would, if we were doing a 1 out of 10, I would definitely put graphics in this game at a 10 out of 10 for the system. This was also a
Hmm.
later game to the system as well, so they had the benefit of working with the system before.
Hmm.
But if you compare it to its predecessors, you can see because the color palette, I think the color palette jumped up significantly with the system where you can see shadows, which I think added a lot of mood to the game, to the atmosphere. The flickering of lights with the flashing was another thing with the lightning and the clouds outside. That all adds such spooky atmosphere. I'd give that one, yeah, that one's a masterpiece amongst, and it inspired even retroactively now people present day making art in that same Pixel's style just because it's so iconic.
Definitely, I would agree. I think this is a 10 out of 10 on graphics. I think they know their vibe, they know what atmosphere they're going for, and they just 100% nail it. Like the world feels alien, the world feels dangerous. All the like bosses and monsters like just command fear.
Yeah, it,
Um,
it feels organically designed.
Kind of funny thing about the sprites when they were first making Metroid is in Nintendo fashion, a lot of the sprites were too cute. Like a lot of the
Uh,
monsters were just kind of too cute looking, so they had to go back and be like, no, like this isn't terrifying enough. So they had to redo a lot of the sprites and make them a bit more creepy.
a little more Contra looking.
Yeah, a little less Super Mario, a little more Contra for sure.
Yeah, well, even the fact that Samus being female was inspired from Ripley
Ripley
from
from Alien.
yeah, it's all very inspired by that in an attempt to make a moodier, atmospheric, adult style game for the Nintendo.
And this was a very adult game. And going back to what you said earlier, I mean, in the original Japanese release, when you die, and Samus kind of throws herself back and her armor rips off. In the Japanese version, she's not clothed at
Oh,
all.
geez.
But yeah, I mean, you can find a version on that on the internet.
Yeah.
But in the North American version, they ended up giving her,
Yeah.
I think, like she's wearing like some sort of undergarment of some sort. Same as at the end, like when you beat the game, she takes off the helmet and the armor, and she's standing there doing the pose, and you're like, oh.
Yeah.
But yeah, very very adult game for sure for the system. I mean, I think this is before ESRB ratings, right? I don't think they
Oh,
had.
yes, well
Yeah,
before.
they didn't have any ratings like that, so there wasn't like, this is a game for teenagers. I mean, I don't know how many parents bought their kids Super Metroid and were like, oh, this game's too scary for you. Maybe you shouldn't play this one.
Yeah, Super Metroid weirdly was one of those titles that got more famous. It did sell very well, but it also got more famous as time went on because it was competing at the time with them doing a console shift to the next generation
Hmm.
because they were so late to the game with it.
Hmm.
But it was designed from the get-go to be a three-part series between the original, the Game Boy, and the Super Nintendo version.
Mm, definitely.
But definitely rate that one high up.
Yeah, I would agree with your 10 out of 10 rating on graphics there. So yeah, let's move on to gameplay. This is a side-scrolling action adventure. I mean, that's the genre. It's pretty classic. You can fit a lot of Nintendo games kind of in that
Yes.
genre, but I think this one is cream of the crop as far as side-scrolling action adventures. Um, I think this is a difficult game. I don't think for the time, like 80s, 90s arcade games and a lot of Nintendo games are just kind of difficult to play. I would say this game is a difficult game, but I don't feel like it's a mean game.
Mm-mm.
Like, there's no point in this game where I'm just like banging my head against the wall, just angry because of I feel cheated or I feel upset. So I think they kind of got a good difficulty there. I definitely want to feel challenged in a game. Dark Souls being my favorite game series of all time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I want to feel challenged in a game, and this does make me feel challenged, but not to the point where I'm just angry and want to throw my controller into the TV. I think the controls, in my opinion, the controls are a little jank, just a little bit.
I
And
get it.
I think I just had trouble getting into the control scheme. I mean, I like that you can shoot like diagonally up and diagonally down, as well as straight up. Like that's really nice. In Mega Man, you have jumping and shooting. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
you can jump, you
Mm-hmm.
can shoot. This game, like you can shoot up, you can shoot over, and that was nice. But I think it takes some getting used to, pressing the shoulder buttons to tilt up, and um, I kind of just felt I was wrestling with the controls a little bit
Mm-hmm.
when I first started playing this game. Definitely doesn't stick too much. Like I don't feel like the whole game. Like it just takes some time to get used to. One thing I definitely want to talk about control wise for this game is like the amount of like secret moves you can do. Like if you
Yeah.
watch speedrunners play this game and the kind of crazy like stuff they're doing, doing bomb jumps and there's even certain special moves where once you unlock the speed boost, you can like start the sprint and then crouch down to a ball and like save your charge and do
Yep.
do like crazy moves like that. And like I mean those are all just in the game and the community of people who love this game are all very familiar with these special moves and I think like that is super cool to me. Like the fact that you can like just get better at the controls and like do like cool secret moves is so cool to me.
Yeah, it was one of the first games I noticed where you could almost break it, break the game in the sense that you could become incredibly powerful. Like you said, exploiting certain combinations of moves. I thought, to your point, I do agree. Retroactively, the controls are a little clunky, and but at the time, I don't know if I noticed that. Maybe just because I'm comparing it then to now. But yeah, as I do play, I do find them a little clunky. I do find it incredibly intuitive how they managed to fit 25 upgraded moves into four buttons and two triggers.
Hmm.
So it is impressive in that sense. But I do find myself wasting bombs unnecessarily occasionally by accidentally pressing the wrong button and such. And yeah, I mean, for a game that requires such precise jumping and platforming, I did find it a little clunky at first. I could only surmise that they figured you become so ultra powerful at the end that
Hmm.
at the end, I mean, there's a point where you get a move where you can kind of just fly in the air at will. So I mean, once you get that thing, it makes a lot of stuff trivial. But the cool thing I did think they did innovative wise, compared to, Mario to Legend of Zelda, was that it was a 2D platformer for sure. But instead of traditionally going from left to right, this game took you all around the map and you moved in every direction. You felt like you were going down tunnels into caverns. It managed to convey that incredibly well. Some shafts, because you had access to your map from the beginning. Some shafts are, 5 or 6 screens long, and then finally later in the game you find that you pop through, and you can't believe that you've opened up this shortcut now
Hmm.
from point A to point B that was never even possible in the first portion of the game.
And that's something that has carried on. Like that's a legacy of this game, is having this
Absolutely.
huge sprawling map, and you see all these areas, and you're like, well, I can't get there yet, but
Yep.
like later on down the road, you're gonna find something that's gonna open that up, and that's like the Metroidvania formula there. That I mean, this game helped start. That is so popular today. So I mean, that's once again a huge testament to like the like how grand and amazing like the scope of this game is, that it would create an entire subgenre based off its like gameplay and goals. Like you're
Yeah.
exploring like Zebes, and like it's such an alien world. And it feels like, honestly, it feels harsh. Like it's like a harsh world. There's
Yes.
lava and like evil creatures, and I don't know, just like the whole formula is super fun. Like defeating bosses and collecting power ups, like just to consistently unlock new areas and ways to play is definitely very rewarding. So, I mean, gameplay wise, like, I mean, I feel like we started at the top of the list, so we're gonna get a lot of these kind of scores. But I mean, this is like a 9 or 10 out of 10 for me as well, as far as gameplay goes.
Yeah, we pulled these from lists where people do across the board agree that these are almost perfect games, and I mean I can't argue with it. It is genre defining, and yeah, it paved the way, like you said, for all future games. Kind of followed the same model, just because of it's clever how it disguises. The designers are making you feel smart, despite the fact that it's designed to be like that,
Mhm.
instead of telling you, hey, you can't go here yet, they just don't let you get there yet until you realize the item. Then you have in the back of your mind, you're like, oh my god, I saw that tall ledge earlier, now I can jump it. It's designed to make you feel powerful, and it's the perfect formula to succeed.
So if you were to give the gameplay a 1 through 10 rating, where would you put this one?
I would put it. It is fast-paced action, and I do like. I'm to your point earlier with the upward and downward shooting. I did find it a little clumsy, but it is helpful. The extra articulation. I'd put this one. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, like you said, kind of beating the horse, but I would have to put this at a 9.5.
I like the addition of the point five.
Yeah, I threw the point five in there because there are other games from the Super Nintendo that I would rate just slightly higher because maybe that's just my own personal preference for how the controls are and the gameplay is.
I 100% agree. Like this is by no means my favorite game on the system, but since we're starting, like right up there on the top of the list, like we're just gonna see a lot of these, and maybe we'll find a better way to rate these. Like maybe the 1 through 7 rating is better than the one
Yeah.
through 10 rating, but we're gonna roll with this for now. So yeah, I mean, once again, this is a top tier game, so we're gonna get these high scores. So let's move on to music, which I think I will broaden this to music and sound, because
Yes.
sound isn't just music for sure. So this was a score composed by Kenji Yamamoto, and I mean, I don't think he is a Nintendo composer that's as familiar as Koji Kondo, who's kind of like the golden boy of
Yes.
music for Nintendo. But I mean, he still did a 100% fantastic job with this. I mean, not even talking about the music, but talking about the sound. And one thing I'd like to point out is the absence of sound.
Yeah.
This game does such a good job with like, there's no music. All you're hearing are the footsteps. The sound of the doors when you open a door. Like that's such a satisfying sound when you open and go through a door in this game.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just love the sound design like that, when you feel like they took the limited like memory on the SNES ROM, and they just did a really good job with sound design. I mean, all the different kind of eerie feelings of like walking through a deep dark cave are present there, and the absence of sound is used just in the perfect way to kind of give you that feeling of awe and danger.
Mm-hmm.
And then to move on to the music, I mean, it's got iconic, music like all these games. I mean, people are constantly going on to retro game playlists and like sampling this music from these games. And personally, I just like listening to these when I'm bored
Yeah.
of the mainstream music. I'm just like, I'm gonna throw on some retro video game music and just
Same
enjoy
here.
myself. So, and it's got some pretty iconic sounds. I mean, nothing that gets stuck in my head quite like Super Mario World or quite like Legend of Zelda, but I mean, like very good music. I would
Yeah. This
say.
one.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I say this one's more or less designed not so much to get stuck in your head. It's more to be moody and atmospheric. In fact, some of the sound effects in this game have musical tones to them. In fact, if you listen to it's one of the more popular motifs. Anytime you're around computers in that game, you'll hear the computers blipping
Oh,
in the
totally.
background,
Yeah.
and they blip into a melody that gets stuck in your head. It's almost it just sounds like a scale upward and then a scale back descending. And same thing with how Legend of Zelda does it. When you find a new item, it plays the motif. It's got the building scale every time you find an upgrade item, and all that is done, like you said, with the absence of sound. The combination of the sparse music and the sound effects kind of playing a part as the atmosphere do really create, especially for that time, a very creepy, moody game.
So yeah, I would say I would rate the music on this very high, as is the
Yeah.
trend. But I would say I'd give this a solid 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with you. If I was comparing it to a Legend of Zelda or a Super Mario World, it's pretty tough because those two hold top spots in my
Oh
heart.
yeah.
Metroid for me, musically, I would probably put around like a 7, just because of, not to say they did it poorly, just the fact that if you were to say, hey, name a Nintendo iconic tune right now, everybody's gonna jump to Mario or Zelda. Metroid probably not so much.
Yeah, I would say, music wise, maybe yeah, maybe not so memorable, but from like general sound design, like fantastic. Like if we were just
Absolutely,
talking about sound design, I could say this is like a 10 out of 10.
absolutely.
So cool. I mean, those are our merits at which we will judge these games. So let's talk about kind of like the rating. So I think like legacy wise, like we've talked about it so much already. This game has a huge legacy. I mean, the
Absolutely.
Metroidvania genre. Um, this is a very popular speedrun game.
Yes.
So like tons of speedrunners are taking this game and running with it. I mean, I've watched recently something I think is really clever, and that's the Link to the Past Super Metroid randomizer run.
I
Where,
popped it on just to scope it.
yeah, I mean
Yeah,
that's just insanity, man.
I don't know if I could do it, but it's pretty wild to watch.
I couldn't do it. Like I don't. I just yeah, I don't have the capacity in my life to handle that kind of torment. But I mean that's just insane. Like there's a huge community of people that want to play this game with randomizer mods, and even this game randomized with other games. And like at the time, if we're talking about comparisons, like I don't think there's really anything quite like Super Metroid at the time. Like now, obviously, there's tons, but
Hmm.
in 1994 when this game came out, like I don't think they really could have taken influence from much as far as other gameplay goes. I mean, this is kind of was a one of a kind sort of game at the time.
Yes, absolutely. It's yeah. I guess to compare it most, it would only be just comparing some of the key features it possesses, like secrets, having you go left to right and then right to left in different sections. I guess you could apply those to similar, and then the leveling up principle, where you get an item that allows you access to the next item and so forth. But aside from comparing it to that, yeah, it's pretty much in its own genre. Explorative shooter platformer. I mean, like I said, it's a very genre defining game, series as a whole, even into the GameCube. So yeah, I'd agree with you.
So I mean, this game is at the top of many lists, and I think it belongs there. Personally, I think this
Hmm.
definitely belongs at the top of the list for best Super Nintendo games. Um, I mean, since we haven't rated anything yet, I guess this is the number one game on our list.
Yeah,
There's nothing else to compare it to at this point. So sitting steady at number one is Super Metroid.
classic. Check it out.
Yes, definitely play this game. If you have not played this game, please go play this game. I imagine if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably played this game.
Most
So,
likely, yeah. I mean, there's a certain list of retro games. If you are into retro gaming or looking to get into it, because I know a lot of young guns are jumping into the retro games now too, because of games they play recently that influenced that game. So a lot of
mhm.
people are going back, but there's definitely a pretty solid 25 titles that should be checked out for every system, guaranteed if you're trying to go back to retro gaming.
I believe with that, it's time to go into our second game, and I think, speaking for myself, this is one of my all-time favorite games of any genre of any era of anything. Like this spawned pretty much my all-time favorite series, and this is The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past.
Oh
Like this
yeah.
game, like I can just ramble and gush about this game. I mean, huge Legend of Zelda fanboy, and I think this game is this game's responsible for kind of creating all those Legend of Zelda tropes that
Hmm.
we've seen in game after game after game after game. I mean, it was recently like that formula was broken kind of with Breath of the Wild. They'd done so many games in that sort of format that they decided maybe they should change it up a little bit, and I think they kind of went back to the original Legend of Zelda with that. But I mean, like Kakariko Village, running around
Yeah.
Hyrule, Death Mountain, all that, all those kind of typical things. The Master Sword. I mean, come on, like those are all just like classic things. Like I own a Master Sword that I
Yeah.
that I keep in my game room. Like huge things that were started by this game. Like
The Triforce, the
yes,
Dark World.
yeah, just so many amazing things came from this game. So that's just me gushing momentarily about this game. But so this was a game developed by Nintendo R&D 4, and Nintendo R&D 4, like, and those are like the superheroes of Nintendo. That's Shigeru Miyamoto, Takashi Tezuka. Like R&D 4 is where like those huge, decade-running Nintendo hits come from, and a lot of them come from the mind of Mr. Shigeru Miyamoto. Like,
Hmm.
he's the creator of the Legend of Zelda series, also the creator of Mario. Like,
Hmm.
this dude's a hero. Like, this guy, I have so much respect for that man. Like, I mean, he created series and characters that I've grown up with. Like
Yes.
because of being kind of like the dorky kid who played a bunch of video games growing up instead of going outside and
Hmm.
making friends. Like I consider a lot of those Nintendo characters like almost like friends to kind of
Yes.
sound, that sounds a little sad coming out of my mouth, but I mean when you grow up with these characters, like you're so familiar with them and you just hold so much love for them. So Shigeru Miyamoto, if you ever find your way to listen to this, you are an amazing man and I appreciate you for everything you've done. So, anyways, yes, produced by Shigeru Miyamoto and directed by Takashi Tezuka. Um, this game was released in 1991 worldwide. It was November 21st in Japan, April 13th, 1992. I take that back. It was actually not worldwide in 1991. So it is April 13th, 1992 in North America, and then the PAL region in September 24th of 1992. So it took them a little while to get that over here. I do know they started development on this. I think before the Super Nintendo was even created, it took quite a few years to get this game out. But they wanted, as with Super Metroid and a lot of the games on the Super Nintendo, they wanted to take the Zelda format and go to the next level.
Yes.
So they kind of took a risk and changed up the format in Zelda 2. Zelda 2 is kind of not the favorite of a lot of people.
Yes.
That game is very, 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 very difficult and very, very different.
It's pretty rough.
And yeah, I'm actually playing that game right now just
Ugh.
because I've never beaten it. And if I call myself a huge Zelda fan and I've never beaten that game, I feel like a liar and a fake.
Yeah.
And that game is just kind of mean and different. I mean, I love it for being a Zelda game and for them trying something new, but they went back to that typical top-down format and they took it to the next level. And every new addition's amazing in this game. So, like we said, this is the third game in the series. Um, and I mean, this game is widely considered one of the greatest video games of all time. Like, not just on the
Yes.
Super Nintendo, like of all time. Um, for good reason. Like, starting all those trends, just everything about it from like, introducing the Dark World and kind of like having that open world feel where like you have all of Hyrule Field when you start
Yes.
this game. Like you can run all the way to the end of the
Yep.
map, and you'll probably die, but you can, and that's
Yes.
super cool. So to say I'm nostalgic about this game is putting it lightly. I'm a huge Zelda fan, so I will have a lot to say about this. What about you?
Well, so in a similar sense, I was quite taken by Zelda early on. That was one I possessed for the original Nintendo, and when it came out on Super Nintendo, I had to have it immediately. It was one of the A-list titles for me, and like you said, the second game was kind of weird, which is a typical trend with Nintendo. I felt like early on was the first game was a smash hit. They needed a second game. The second game, I guess, the Western audiences at the time always wanted something different. They had the same thing happen with the second Mario game. Uh, so which was originally really, or which eventually was released in America as the Lost Levels,
Hmm.
but American audiences wanted something different, so they came out with the Mario 2, which is vastly different from all the others, which was actually a reskin of another Japanese game, Doki
Hmm.
Doki Panic.
Yep.
But Zelda 2 was the same thing, that side scroller. I was really excited for that title too because it was a sideways. I thought the graphics were better, showcasing, you can see Link from the side, but I just despised that game so much compared to the first one, which I played all throughout my childhood. And then when the Link to the Past came out, I considered that to be the best game I played for probably about 10 years thereafter, on a level of storytelling, a level of perfect pacing and progression, another classic example of rewarding you for exploration. Maybe not to the level of how much you enjoy the game, but I definitely hold a really high spot in my heart for the Zelda series. Especially the early on ones. And I felt like with the Link to the Past, they made such a epic tale that the future titles kind of followed in suit almost exactly as that game from that point
Hmm.
forth. With the dungeons, the introduction, not that the first game didn't possess dungeons, but to the point where they were so characterized beautifully. I mean, you could see in the water dungeons, the walls looked saturated. The swamp lands where you got the poison on the walls, and I just thought they really took it. And again, with bringing up Metroid, just having incredible boss fights that use the item that you just got. You know that some point in that fight it's going to become a key item to beating the boss. And I thought that is such a clever way to make you feel smart and powerful in a game. And I also love, just one more point, the fact that the title is in reference to the protagonist, which is Zelda, and Link is a random character who woke up in the night because he heard Princess Zelda calling for help. And the cool part is that most likely she's calling to, Link, and the uncle overhears it and goes out, and that's how you get your sword and shield in the beginning of the game. Again, no spoilers here, but it's just such a cool premise that you were the one destined, and the story of Link and Zelda throughout their history in Hyrule, how it's a reoccurring story with different characters each time, basically fulfilling the same rules against evil, Ganon or Ganondorf, depending on from where you start. I just thought that premise and that gameplay style inspired me into the fantasy genre from that point forth. I could attribute it probably to Legend of Zelda. Just the fantasy style of that. The storytelling was incredibly advanced for the time.
And I think, you say that got you into fantasy. I think this kind of goes the other way for me. Like, I grew up a huge fantasy dork. Like, I was playing Dungeons and Dragons with my uncle at a very young age, and I was reading books
Mm-hmm.
in the classroom when I should have been out playing recess, and I was reading fantasy books. Still to this day, like fantasy is my favorite genre to read, and I
Mm-hmm.
think Legend of Zelda, really ties close to sword and shield and magic, and I
Mm-hmm.
mean they even kind of the Hylians even kind of look like elves with their pointy ears, and so I
Mm-hmm.
was really drawn to that universe, just kind of like the mysticism around it. It's always felt like kind of like such a magical, inexplicable universe to me.
Mm-hmm.
um, I love like the vibe that I get while playing those games. It just kind of just sets you in this world that you can just escape in, and it's like a comfortable place. Like Hyrule is just such a cool place to just hang out in. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you go to the Kakariko village, and there's that town and kind of people hanging out, and you can go climb all the way up to Death Mountain where there's boulders crushing you, and it's
Yeah.
not a very fun place, but I mean, just the entire world is so fun to like be in, and yeah, this game just started all that.
Yeah, it makes you feel like a hero because if Link was just living his life as a poor boy in Hyrule, just doing his stuff, and then that moment of destiny appears where you are taken from your normal life and he explores the kingdom that he lives in as an adventurer, it's such an inspiring tale.
And I'm not sure. I can't quite remember if it started with Link to the Past as far as the Triforce of Courage, the Triforce of Power, and the Triforce of
Yes.
Wisdom. But Link holding the Triforce of Courage, he kind of has to be brave, and it's up to him to conquer conquer each dungeon, defeat the bosses, and have the courage to go through and save Hyrule and save the princess. And personally, whenever I'm feeling kind of like scared, or some task is seeming kind of daunting, like kind of think Triforce of Courage, like, let's be brave, pull
Mm-hmm.
yourself up by the bootstraps and go do this thing.
Yeah, yeah. It's super inspiring. And another game where they let you get powerful and then they beat you down because you go to fight the wizard and the wizard kind of flees and you find out that you have to now save the seven princesses, so the whole plot shifts, and then you find out spoiler alert that he's Ganon. So it's just such a cool tale, although I think at the end, doesn't it says like it's rest in peace forever, and then it of
They
course
obviously don't
doesn't.
do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they might have that. They didn't realize that the Link to the Past would be such a huge hit, and that would be bringing back Ganon in that form for many years left to come.
Yeah.
As they explain in the not so solid Hyrule Historia, where they try to kind of draw the timelines all together, which I feel like was definitely an afterthought on Nintendo's part. They're like, let's have this make sense. Where I
Yes.
feel like they didn't, obviously they didn't really intend the timeline to really be what it became, but they tried with Hyrule Historia.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what is cool about Link to the Past, and I've said a million times, is that formula. Like, you go to the dungeon, you find an item, and the item makes you more powerful, and then the puzzle solving in the dungeons with that item is just so fun. Like, I I played a lot of dungeon crawlers on the NES. We kind of had like one mechanic, right? That was like go through and like slice the enemy and
Mm-hmm.
kind of beat the game. But Legend of Zelda had like puzzles in the dungeon. And I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely love the idea of like having to solve puzzles to get through the dungeon. So like incorporating the items with the puzzle solving in every dungeon just made every single one so much fun. Like, you were so excited to find the next dungeon and
Yes.
kind of see what that was about. And then once you had the item, like, once again with like Super Metroid, there's just secrets all over the place. Like, you can use um, the various items to kind of uncover more about Hyrule. Like, once you get the hook shot, you can
Mm-hmm.
cross bridges and kind of get to more spots. And there's so much hidden items to find. You can find all the bottles and
And then
find
when
all
you
the
flip
heart
to
pieces. And that was another thing from Link to the Past is doing the completionist thing of trying to find all the heart pieces is super fun.
oh yeah, and then when they had the Dark World, you had to find all new secrets. It was almost like they got a free second go at it.
Yeah, and that was such a cool mechanic, a puzzle mechanic as well. Like, shifting between the two worlds to
Mm-hmm.
try to accomplish your goal was super clever at the time, and they did it in such a clever way. Like, so this game was kind of it's kind of groundbreaking for Nintendo in the sense that it was about twice the cart itself, like the ROM, was about twice the size. I think most ROMs up to this point were about 2 megabit or 2 megabyte. I'm sorry, I can't quite remember, but this doubled that number to four.
All right.
And they still, I mean, even with having all that extra memory, they still were super clever and resourceful in saving memory. So the Dark World, trying to fit all that on the disc, they basically just used a bunch of the same assets and did a palette swap. It's all like
Yeah,
the same
yeah.
stuff. It's just super clever, kind of how they use that. to tell
Yeah,
the story.
there's something to be said about doing more with less. That's why I think that some of the older titles, the retro titles, stand the test of time because they aren't just substanceless razzle dazzle. They are strong fundamentals, great storytelling, and they really do make you feel like a champion. And I think that personal experience is why people's memories, you look back to those as fond memories playing these games.
Hmm. So, I mean, talking about like legacy for this game, I mean, Nintendo wanted to go back to this game with A Link Between Worlds and created that 3DS title that was almost a mirror of A Link to the Past, just kind of updated. And it's funny that they wanted to create a whole new game that was basically the same game
Hmm.
for A Link to the Past. I thought that was really clever. You know, did the whole thing with the Hyrule map as it is, and
Hmm.
finding the items, and even using some of the same items with kind of like that new fresh twist. Which I don't know if you played that game, but that's another game that's like a super hit in my book. I love The Link Between Worlds.
All right.
So let's see here. Let's start rating this game. I mean, I can gush about this game for a while, but I will honestly just be rambling probably at the
Hmm.
same points about why I love this game. So let's move to presentation. So the graphics, like the color palette, is great. I mean, it's a very bright and vibrant game, like kind of contrasting Super Metroid.
Hmm.
Like this game just kind of like pops with like charm. The sprites are all great. Like I love the item sprites, and
Hmm.
Link's sprite is super cute with his pink hair, which
Yeah, he's
that
got
was
pink
due to
hair.
some color palette limitations. The why they had pink hair, I think they wanted it to be a different color, but I think that's what they had to do with the color palettes there. But the sprites are so charming, and the diversity of the map even in Hyrule. I mean, you have like the Lost Woods, which kind of has that like foggy layer. They use I don't know what SNES mode that is, but they have the layer of fog over
Hmm.
in the Lost Woods, and they use Mode 7 for the map. When you open up the map of Hyrule, it switches to that Mode 7 graphics, and just kind of showcases the diversity of Hyrule. They have the lake, the mountains, the Lost Woods, and the desert. And they do such a good job kind of making them all feel like their
Hmm.
own their own places. The map is not really that big. Like honestly, it's not a huge map, but every corner of that map has its own character, and
Hmm.
it all just feels and looks really cool. Like I said earlier, I love getting like just stuck in Hyrule. Like living in Hyrule is a ton of fun for me. So like I mean, presentation, graphics wise, like I would give this game a 10 out of 10. Surprise, surprise, being
Yeah.
the huge Zelda dork that I am.
I'd have to back you up on that too, just because, like the trend of Nintendo taking the original game and just bumping it to the next level. They had the sprites are way more expressive. The lighting reflects on their faces. You can see flicker, you can see shadows, you can see grass wavering. They really, for the time especially, and in that style of genre, the top down, they made that look like a real living world. And at the time, I couldn't even wrap my head around it as a kid.
Hmm.
And going back, I still find it to be just as exciting. So I
Definitely.
agree, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, that's a game that just it stands the test of time. Like I feel like this is a game I can play whenever, at any point. Like this is definitely when I replayed it for the show, I had just thought to myself like this game is just as good now as it was, in 1992 whenever it released.
Hmm.
Which I will say I did not play it in 1992, but but as soon as I got my hands on a Super Nintendo as a kid, like yes, this is a game I have loved, but yeah, it stands the test of time for sure. Um, Gameplay. So this is a top-down action adventure, and I feel like this game is super intuitive to play. I feel like you get the point. Like they do a good job introducing you to like what your goal is and what you need to do. Like save the princess, okay. Like you leave your house, you go to the castle. You get that you get the message from Zelda in your sleep
Hmm.
to help her out, and you run to the castle and find your uncle, and like you get your sword and your shield, and you're like, okay, it's go time. You slash the enemies. The controls are easy. You have one button to slash, and then you have another button to use their special items that you get later on. So the controls are simple. I never really feel, um, you know, like the controls were clunky or confusing. It just was easy to play and smooth. Um, the I mean, the goal is very straightforward. Save the princess, and to save the princess, you need to rescue all seven sages who are in the various dungeons strewn about, and it's a very easily understandable goal, and it's super fun to crawl through the dungeons and solve the puzzles, get the item to make you stronger, and um, on and upward to defeat Ganon. I mean, it's so simple. It's just so simple, but so much fun, and I think that's where the beauty comes in just how simplistic this game is.
Hmm. I would have to agree with that. They use controls cleverly, like you said. They introduce the principles of how things work very easily, and you even use them throughout the dungeon in order to complete it, to really cement it down. And then even transposing into boss fights, and then of course into the final boss fight where you have to almost use all items, or more or less some of the more powerful ones. Yeah, it's just a fantastic design. Nothing against how they set that up. It's just one of the best examples of it.
Mm, definitely. See, I would say gameplay wise, I mean, once again, 10 out of 10. I may be slightly biased here with
Mm,
my sleeping score, but I definitely give this the gameplay and kind of the control scheme, everything, just a 10 out of 10 for this game.
agreed.
So moving on to music, this was composed by the great Koji Kondo, who is responsible for many of the Nintendo classics, and he obviously reprised the Zelda theme from the original NES Legend of Zelda, which is the very very iconic
Hmm.
Zelda theme that's used kind of throughout all the games. And I honestly never get sick of that music. Like whenever you're out in the open map and that Zelda theme is playing, like it just gets stuck in my head, and I don't feel like I need to flush it out. It's great. I love it.
Hmm.
Um, the general sound design is pretty good. I don't think, and this is, I guess, one thing I do have to say that is not necessarily negative for The Legend of Zelda, but they have done better. Is like the sound design isn't quite as good as Super Metroid. I mean, they used some cool stuff that the Super Nintendo could do, like a reverb. The Super Nintendo actually could actually do some effects processing for the
Hmm.
sound. They actually had some space to do reverb and stuff. So when you're in the dungeons and like hanging out underground, you could hear the reverberation, like you would hear if you're in like a deep dark corridor. When you slash a bush, you get the nice swipe sound. When
Hmm.
you get the rupee, you get the nice kind of ka-ching rupee sound. But um, not quite to the point of Super Metroid does it really immerse me. Like the sound design itself isn't quite as immersive. I mean, I love the rewarding sounds you get from performing every task. Um, Kind of the tense music when you're going into a dungeon, or
Hmm.
the sound of the hook shot chain as you kind of whip across. Um, I mean, it all feels great, but it's just not as like it doesn't define the atmosphere quite like Super Metroid does for me. So I'd
Yes.
say, I mean, music wise, I'd say this is a 9 out of 10 for me.
Yes. I would agree. Music, I would give it a 10 out of 10. All the little motifs when you open up a chest, you get the da-da-da, all
Yeah.
that stuff's key. You're right, the sounds, I mean, it is cool, the reverberations and the metal sounds they had. When you hear some of the knights running, you can hear some of the clinking. But yeah, you're right, not as exciting as a Metroid, which has a unique sound for everything. But yeah, I'd give it a 9 out of 10 as well. I would agree with you on that.
Hmm. So going on to rating, I mean, this game has a huge legacy. We already talked about that with it defining kind of all the different tropes of the seven sages and Hyrule being what it is, and delving into the dungeons, finding the item. Like that Zelda formula was used for all the Zelda games thereafter. Like huge, huge, huge legacy. Um,
Absolutely.
there's a lot of cool stuff that they even did like after the Legend of Zelda. Like they one of the kind of weirder things they did with this game is um, they released Legend of Zelda BS, which was for the satellite view system that was only in Japan. And I don't know if you know too much about the satellite view, but
Mm-mm.
this was I actually have to pull up the page here for the satellite view. But it was basically this hookup for the SNES that gave it a network connection. And I
Oh,
have to
really?
find. Give me one sec. I have to find the. So the satellite view, what it did was you would log on at a certain. It was broadcast at certain hours. So you'd connect your SNES to a network, and it would broadcast live at a certain time, um, different like new game to the Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. This is one of the games that was um, given a BS, which I can't remember what it stands for. I need to pull that one up. So here we are. I got some stuff now. So the satellite view service was accessed via the St. Giga satellite station between 4 and 7 p.m. And the user was required to have a subscription, as well as a BS tuner in order to operate the satellite view. So during this time, the users could download and play games, and the BS system broadcasted for 5 years up until June 2000. So yes, a large catalog was previously released in cartridge format, as well as new games was made available for download through the service. But you could actually go and play kind of an add-on to A Link to the Past. And it's called, BS Legend of Zelda, which I'm not BSing you. Like this is a real thing. You can go look up. I think they actually have a name for it. So I mean, all I'm seeing is BS Legend of Zelda on this, but I mean, it's crazy that there is this kind of weird format, like very true to Nintendo's innovative nature, that you could go and you could only play this when it's being broadcast at a certain time. And they actually had like live voice acting for this because of the technology they were able to do that. But there was a continuation onto A Link to the Past using the satellite view with BS Legend of Zelda.
Very
And
cool.
we've already talked about Link Between Worlds being, a pretty much just complete
Eidetic.
clone, of A Link to the Past. I mean, comparisons wise, once again, I don't think there was too much quite like A Link to the Past. I think there were quite a few games that did like the kind of top-down action adventure in that kind of perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a lot of games like Secret of Mana or the Soul Blazer series, Illusion of Gaia,
Mm-hmm.
Terra Enigma, that are that exact kind of like Zelda-esque,
Mm-hmm.
top-down action RPG, swinging the sword and running around. But I think there's a lot that came after, but not quite that much before that did what Zelda did.
Yeah, I would agree with you. A lot of games did have the top-down perspective, but were not the same game style, so I wouldn't consider them. Again, if you're rating it on the merits of it's a progressive game where you progress through, it tells a story, and you gain abilities that allow you access to new areas, then I'd say, yeah, I mean, there's a few games that do that same principle. But yeah, it kind of stands on its own, which is why to date it's still acclaimed, even by myself, as one of the best Super Nintendo games ever created.
And one of the greatest games of all time, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
It's just has that staying power of you can play this game whenever, and it holds up to all the other like modern games. I mean, part of why we're doing this podcast, obviously, is we like playing these retro games more than some
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
modern stuff at times. But this game definitely holds its own, and same with Super Metroid. This is one of the most popular games for speedrunning. Especially with that
Mm-hmm.
new randomizer mod that everyone's playing these days. Randomizing this and playing it on top of Super Metroid, where you have to beat both games randomized. It's a huge legacy there. I would say, I mean, this game to me this is a masterpiece. This is a 10 out of 10 game. I would say, I think this game is on the top of the list of best Super Nintendo games of all time. I would put this above Super Metroid on our list. at least, and say, best game on the Super Nintendo.
Yes, I would agree. I would put this also just above Super Metroid as well.
Well, right on. I think the next game on our list, the next and last for this episode, might provide some competition for a lot of people. But this game has another like super long-lasting legacy for video games in general. Just what it
Oh yeah.
kind of led to and how it was created and everything. But we're talking about Super Mario World. Um, this is, I mean, this was a launch title for the Super Nintendo. Like, this game came out with the Super Nintendo.
Lots of pressure.
So, I mean, it was mine and obviously a ton of other people's very first Super Nintendo game. This is
Same
one that, I have so much nostalgia for, like being a child and hanging out at my friend's house and playing this game and staying up far too late, just trying
Oh
to
yeah.
get through as much as we could. Like, just tons and tons and tons of nostalgia for this game.
And it could save your progress, which was big.
Oh, dude, the saves were great. When in the NES, where there wasn't many games with that battery save, like having the ability to save your game was huge for sure. So this is another game that was developed by Nintendo R&D 4, Mario being another brainchild of the great Shigeru Miyamoto. So this game was directed by Takashi Tezuka and produced by Shigeru Miyamoto. So kind of a flip from The Legend of Zelda there.
Gotcha.
Same team, just kind of flipped around. But this game, they were working on, obviously before the launch of the Super Nintendo, and they wanted, they were going off the success of Super Mario 3, which Super Mario 3 is another game that, like, is considered to be, like, one of the greatest games, like definitely one of the greatest Mario games. I feel like you're always hearing Super Mario 3 and Super Mario World as like, neck and neck for like people's favorite. And so they were coming off like huge expectations. Super Mario World 3 sold like millions of copies and was a huge game. So they needed to make Super Mario World like just a huge hit. Like, it was going to sell the Super Nintendo and it had to follow up to the like hugely successful Super Mario 3, and I mean, I feel like they did a fantastic job. Like, this is my favorite Mario, like, hands down. Like, this is the best Mario game. Like, I play this game probably once a year.
Yes.
Like, I just go back and play this game. So a little more history on it. Released November 21st, 1990 in Japan, August 23rd, 1992 in North America, and April 11th, 1992 in the EU. This was a launch title along with a F-Zero.
Oh, all right, that makes sense.
So those are the two launch title games for the Super Nintendo, which, I mean, it's crazy to me, and I don't know how many systems can say this, but this was the first game to come out on Super Nintendo, and then also, like, one of the absolute best games. Like, how many consoles, just, like, the absolute best game on the console comes out at the launch? Like, that's insane.
Well, I believe there's a lot of pressure on the guys because they were told that this would be the title that steers how the Super Nintendo sells. So they wanted to do it with the success of, Super Mario 1, and then they came back to the same team for Super Mario 3. And like you said, they didn't want to fall into the shadow of that title. And so when they worked on this title, I think it took them 3 years to complete it, if memory serves, from a documentary I seen. And during that time, they were trying to take everything that worked for the first one. They didn't want to over convolute it. They wanted to keep it as simple as possible. And so they stripped it down to some of the fundamental things that worked from the previous titles, and that one being the feather, which they added, taking over the leaf, the raccoon Mario. So they applied some of the same things to it in the same sense as a Legend of Zelda and a Super Metroid. They took the original and just made it better in every sense. And one of the things I always admired about the Super Mario franchise was the music integrating with their sound effects. Just the fact that everything was syncopated. So when you did a sound effect, it would take over the tone that would be musically there. That way, everything was all in the same key and in the same meter, and
Hmm.
that everything would line up. And like you said, in an attempt to save resources, it was one of their tactics,
Yep.
and it became a fundamental in the game. One of the cool things that I found out about Super Mario World was anytime you're on Yoshi, whatever the music track is that's playing, once you jump on Yoshi, it adds bongos to it. And it's a thing that reoccurs throughout the entire game. And it's something super subtle that just really shows how much attention to detail they really did pay in order to make that game just incredibly successful.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about the music for Super Mario in its own like hour-long
Yeah.
podcast. I mean, Koji Kondo was responsible for that soundtrack as well, being just like the golden composer for Nintendo at
Mm-hmm.
the time. Like, he uses that theme, da 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 da
Mm-hmm.
da da, and he takes that theme, and the way he creates atmosphere is he takes that one like central theme and he just changes it. Like he's in the ghost houses, he just slows it way down and
All
kind of adds the
right.
minor key. Like when you're underwater, it's all the same. Like every different like kind of world and area is revolving around that central theme the entire time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like if you haven't caught that before, like
No, I
go
never
listen
did.
to like a soundtrack for that game, and that one melody is it
It's a
pervades the
reoccurring.
entire world. It's reoccurring, and he just changes the vibe very subtly while you're still using that same melody throughout the entire game. And that's like that, like being a musician,
It's
that's something like I
genius.
have like huge respect for.
Yes.
Like I just can't. I stink at doing like concepts myself when I'm trying to like a concept album or using like a central theme. Like my brain jumps around everywhere. Like that's just how it works. But that dude took that one central theme, variated it slightly, and like you're never bored of it. Like,
No.
and it is from like the start of that game. That melody is just stuck in your head.
Well, it was cool because they kind of started it in three and they really honed in on it for the Super Mario World. But to create the world, it was vast and in typical Nintendo nature, it's hidden with many, many secrets. Which, as a kid, I mean, I found secrets for that game for 10 years playing it. There's things that I come across that I never came across before.
Oh, and
Uh,
that's so much fun. Like some of the best parts of the gameplay are like finding all the exits, You
hmm
find all the exits and you if you um get all of the exits into the Star World, you can go into the super secret special world, which
Yeah.
has more levels that are, kind of the harder levels of the game. And like that was so fun to me. Like just discovering that world and like finding all the exits was definitely like a super just kind of fun mystical thing for me as a kid.
That's for all the diehards, kind of like an homage to the Lost levels.
Oh, definitely. Like, and some of those are hard, man. Like Tubular, I think is the name. It's the infamous level in the special world where you have to,
Absolutely.
you get the little balloon and Mario puffs up and floats his way through the level, and the football player enemies. I can't think of the name of them right now, but they're throwing baseballs at you. It's like
Yeah.
that's such a mean level. It gives me nightmares to this day.
Yeah, and even having just Star Road, that whole area that wasn't even in any concept before.
Definitely, and all the different colored Yoshis you can get. If you wanted,
Yeah.
so one of the like greatest things about Super Mario World is the introduction of Yoshi. And
hmm
Yoshi, I mean, that's another thing you could spend a whole episode talking about is so Shigeru Miyamoto wanted to add Mario riding a dinosaur as early as like the second or third Super Mario. But there was just too much hardware limitation. Like he couldn't get it. Like he couldn't work it out to where Mario was riding a dinosaur. So the idea of Yoshi had been around for actually well before Super Mario World, but he was finally able to implement that with some help from some of the other designers, and it's such a huge part of that game. I mean, I know people whose favorite Mario character is Yoshi.
hmm Became a mega character.
So yeah, you get Yoshi as a power up, and he can eat the enemies, and he shoots out the eggs, and
hmm
you get different colored Yoshis, and one of the ways to get them was in the Star World. And depending on what shell Yoshi ate was what power up they got. You know, you get a blue shell lets you fly, a red shell shoots
Hmm.
fireballs, the yellow shell you jump and create kind of the earthquake. And um, if you go to the Star World and you get the Yoshis of the corresponding color, no matter what shell they ate, they inherited that ability.
Hmm.
So I mean, I love getting Yoshi, and I'm always super sad when you are playing a level where either Yoshi accidentally dies or you just bail on Yoshi. Like there's
Hmm.
quite a few levels where they make you bail out on Yoshi, and you know it's a testament to Mario's sadism, which I think the true hero of the Super Mario world is Luigi. You know, not Mario. Mario is a jerk and a sadist, but it's his party, so he gets to be the hero.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah.
It is cool adding him as a character. One of the crazier secrets in the game, bailing on Yoshi, since we're on the topic. It's one of the bridges. There's all the buzz saws, and you can dump Yoshi after you jump under the finish line, and you can jump back up. And there's a second hidden finish line
Yep.
that takes you to Soda Pop Lake or whatever.
That's the one that always comes to my mind too. Like you have to bail on Yoshi. Like the game designers put it that way.
Yeah, I think
I
they do it intentionally to make you feel bad.
Definitely. I mean, and there's a huge legacy there. Like I'm not sure if you watch the Game Grumps much, but one of the Game Grumps, Rubber Ross is his handle, and he created a bunch of Super Mario Maker levels. Like there's a whole series of the Game Grumps where they're watching this dude or they're playing through this dude's levels, and he has a whole series. I think there's between the last Mario Maker and the newest one, it's called You're a Monster, and you have to get through. Like the easiest way to get through the level is by just murdering all the Yoshis, but you can get through the level by saving them all. It's just extremely difficult. But I mean, like that in itself, in a game that has a huge legacy, like that in itself has its own legacy. Like bailing on Yoshi, you know, there's a bunch of YouTube videos like saying like, is Mario punching Yoshi in the head when he
I think
sticks
he
his tongue out?
is.
And I think he is. Like I think even people have said like, yeah, Mario is like really whacking Yoshi upside the head to get him to stick his tongue out, which is more fuel for like Mario as a sadist, and he's not a good
Yes.
dude.
But yeah, no denying that that game has a ton of iconic things in it that just paved the way for the future games.
Definitely. I think like the 2D format of Super Mario. I mean, obviously they branched into 3D very successfully, but I think that the 2D iterations all kind of are just different iterations of Super Mario World. I mean, in Super Mario Maker, like even the new Super Mario Bros. U and all those games, like it's the same format. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
same power ups, same platforming. In Super Mario Maker, you can even do Super Mario World, pixel graphics and the skin for your levels, and so I think that really kind of still to this day is the formula used for 2D Mario.
Hmm. You wonder if there's a comfort to that, and they know that, or they've encapsulated it, and now they use that just to. Because I mean, if you look at even more Nintendo titles, they all do have that kind of common thing throughout. That it's essentially the same premise, the same concept, just done differently and updated.
And there's endless things that are charming about Super Mario that I can talk about. I mean, I love the ghost houses. I think
Yes.
that was the first Mario to do the ghost houses, and I mean there were boos and different kind of levels in Super Mario 3.
Three.
I do
Yeah.
remember them, but like the ghost houses in 2 were so like they took that like idea of secrets and they took it to the next level. I mean, every ghost house has like the crazy like exits
Yep.
and the vibe, like the music in the ghost houses and the booze and everything. Like you can't even take a Yoshi in the ghost house, like Yoshi
Yeah.
has to hang
Yeah.
out outside. Like that is just super, like I don't know, super cool to me. I always loved that. Just all the little secret exits and the charm of the ghost houses. The little exits you can get. Like in World 2, you can find the exit that gets you the free Yoshi and the free power ups.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, just everything about that game is classic Nintendo. I think like that game just screams like Nintendo. With
Hmm.
the charm, the presentation, like everything about that is classic. It's another game with a Link to the Past that holds up 100% today. It's just as good now as it was in 1991 when it released.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to actually rating this game. Presentation. I think this is some of the best pixel graphics on the SNES.
Agreed.
Like the backgrounds are vibrant and popping, and every world is so diverse.
Yes.
Um, the sprites are amazing. Like, the way Yoshi looks, the way Mario looks, like all the enemy sprites are all so charming and so classic. Like I can just see them in my head at any point. Like they're
Hmm.
just cut into my memory. Um, I think they wanted to showcase what the SNES was capable of, and they 100% did. Like they brought Mario to the next generation, like no problem.
Absolutely.
So I'd say, I mean, this game 10 out of 10, graphics wise, like presentation, everything 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I would have to put it as the number one game on the system, which is weird because it's a launch title. It's probably a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow, but
Definitely. I mean, I think you think you might be right with as far as presentation goes. Like,
well, it has it all. It has it's cute, it's tense, it's diverse. You have different abilities. There's multiple ways to attack each area. You can completely miss areas. You can play through the game regularly, or you can look for the secrets. There is no shortage of just intuitive design across the board. Like you said, even some levels you're always trying to find Yoshi, keep him alive, or you can play, the sadistic Mario and jump.
yeah,
There's
definitely.
no penalty for any of it either. It's how you want to do it.
What would you rate gameplay wise? Or sorry, not even gameplay wise. We're not even onto that yet. What would you rate presentation wise? You say 10 out of 10 for
10
this
out of
game.
10. I mean, it's got phenomenal graphics. Again, genre defining platforming. From that point forth, I think the bar was set much higher. And if you even compare it, Mario 3 had end of console graphics, so very good for the Nintendo.
Hmm.
And the Super Nintendo just completely crushes it. Even in the sense, if you listen to 8-bit music compared to 16-bit music, uh, the polyphonic sounds are just slightly more realistic, and you can tell that he's very influenced by the ragtime. A lot of ragtime stylizing in the music. The sound design is second to none. I know we're not on that category, but the presentation across the board of just difficulty, intuitive, innovation, boss fights, progression. That game's just a 10 out of 10 across the board. Finale boss fights phenomenal in that game. Requires, a slightly more advanced puzzle solving. It's just a 10 out of 10 across the board for me on Super Mario.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, to formally talk about gameplay, I mean, this game, as a side-scrolling platformer, it's just the controls are so tight and responsive. I mean,
Hmm.
I think they're some of the most comfortable controls of any game ever. Like
Yes.
Mario stops when he needs to. He doesn't go further than he needs to. Like, um, all the power-ups are super fun. Like you get the cape. If you get good at it, you can fly indefinitely across the level with the
Yes.
cape. Um, so I mean, being a platformer where you do have to kind of like start and stop on a dime and be very precise with your jumps and movements, like I never feel like this game is unfair with that. I feel like whenever I kill myself in this game, it is completely my fault. Like
Yes.
I'm just running through it as fast as I possibly can, or I'm just being an idiot. Like this game is so comfortable to play.
Yeah, they added the spin jump, which was cool because it was a little bit more powerful with the sacrifice of height. It was kind of designed to showcase the controller of the system. So they have the bumpers for rotating or pushing the screen further up or down. If you duck or if you hold up, you can look up and down with the advanced articulation. I thought was great. And then
Hmm.
being able to store an item, it was a pretty way ahead of its schedule in my opinion, or way ahead of its time in my opinion, because you can suspend an item just in case you get hit. Hey, in case I get hit, this mushroom will fall, and there's a penalty for missing it. I thought that was a really cool, clever design in there
Hmm.
too, because your reward could actually even penalize you. You could die trying to get it.
Hmm. And I always got angry when like I have a feather in my reserve and I accidentally pick up like the
The
flower.
fireballs.
Yeah, and I'm like, I didn't want that. Now I'm angry with myself.
I never used the fireballs in that game
No,
ever.
there's no reason to because the cape is great. You can just spin whack your enemies away, and
Yeah.
like flying was so much fun, and just being able to kind of slow your fall, especially on some of the more difficult platforming parts, it's key. Like it's super key to that game.
Yes.
Um, yeah, I mean, we could talk about goals in that game. I mean, it's very classic for the time, like save the princess.
Mm-hmm.
Go through all of the different worlds. Every level in every world, and just uh, fight Bowser, save the princess. I mean, it's the classic formula, but it's so much fun. It always is. Like it's always fun to go beat Bowser and save Peach. One thing they did with this one is they introduced the Koopa Kids,
Mm-hmm.
and the Koopa Kids are great. Like they named them after you know
Composers.
all the different composers, and they all have their own kind of character, and all the boss fights for them are super fun, like you've talked about. They have like different mechanics, but it's always the same, right? It's always like three bops to the head and they're dead. But the
Yeah.
way you have to achieve that is different. And I think there might have been a few bosses. I think one of the boss Koopas, you actually boop into the lava and he dies, which is a little different there. But for the most part, it's three boops and you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the fortresses too, where at the end of the level there's I think Reznors they're called.
Mm-hmm.
Because maybe they were talking about Trent Reznor, I don't know.
Weird.
But you have to boop all the Triceratops off the spinning platform
Yeah,
so
those
you
were
could beat
tough.
the end. So I mean those could be kind of tough. Like you get the pattern down and you got it, but I mean you miss jump once and you end up in the lava, and that is sad. I also think the Bowser fight at the end is super fun. Like he
Mm-hmm.
has the different stages. It's adequately challenging. I guess one thing I'll say about the difficulty of this game is I don't feel like this is a difficult game.
Mm-mm.
I think if you want difficulty from this game, you go to the special world,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where you get it. Those are the most challenging levels in the game, kind of for the people who want that challenge. But I mean, the main worlds, like there's nothing that terribly difficult in that game, which is nice because it's just you just play through it and have fun.
Yep.
And if you want that difficulty, you can go get it, and you get rewarded too. Once you finish the special world and you get all 93 or however many exits there are in that game, it turns the Koopa's heads into the little Mario
Mm-hmm.
shells and changes the piranha plants into jack-o'-lanterns and stuff. So, I mean, you get rewarded too if you feel like you need to go,
Yeah,
do everything in that game, which is super cool in my opinion. So
yeah, I would
I'd say
totally agree.
gameplay wise, like that game's a 10 out of 10. I mean, we're rating all these games this in this episode like 9, 10 out of 10 because we decided to start at the top of the list. But I think this game is truly a 10 out of 10 across the board.
Yeah,
Um, Go ahead. Sorry.
I would totally agree with it. Yeah, we are starting with the A list. I doubt anyone would argue with that too. Like you said, it's not particularly difficult. It's pretty much designed for everyone to pick up and enjoy, and the penalties of death are pretty minimal. With it, you might have to start over a couple levels, but once you cleared out an area, I thought they did a great job with adding a little bit of challenge to it, not completely taking it out, but also not completely leaving it in. Because original Mario, by comparison, is much more difficult.
Oh, definitely. And they were coming off too, stuff like the Lost levels that were deemed too hard to play for
Mm-hmm.
American audiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Super Mario 3 is even far more difficult than this game.
I totally agree.
Um, so I mean, it was kind of nice change of pace. I mean, I said earlier I enjoy difficulty in games like Dark Souls and feeling challenged, but I think this game does a good job of like being fun and challenging. And then if you really want the difficult stuff, you go to the special world and you get it there.
Yep.
Um, so let's talk about music. I mean, we kind of briefly did during the introduction of this game, but composed by Koji Kondo. Um, Everything about the sound design is perfect in this game. I mean, just the coin, you collect the coins, you get
Mm-hmm.
that sound. Like the spin jump has its own sound, and kicking a Koopa shell is so great. Like the little
Yes.
the little pop sound when you kick a Koopa shell is so much fun. So just it makes the game feel amazing to play.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, sound design is perfect, and then the soundtrack, which we already talked about. I mean, Koji Kondo took that theme, and he just iterated on it, and it's perfect. It's an earworm. It gets stuck in your head. It's one of those sounds that I'll literally be going about my day, and then Mario stuck in my head. Like, especially the little like victory sound when you beat a level.
Mm-hmm.
Like that just gets 100% stuck in my head forever and ever and ever and ever. And like
Mm-hmm.
he's just an amazing composer when it comes to creating sound that represents a vibe or just getting those songs stuck in your head. So music for me in this game is just 10 out of 10.
I would have to second that. All the motifs for beating castles, the end of level chimes, when time speeds up because you're taking too long to finish a level, all of that is just so cleverly done. Uh, Definitely a 10 out of 10.
Hmm. So let's move on to legacy and rating. I would say legacy wise, this cemented the classic format that Mario games still follow.
Mm-hmm.
There's tons of cool stuff that were created because of this game. I don't know. Do you know what Kaizo Mario is?
Mm-mm.
So Kaizo Mario are those insanely difficult Mario levels, and there's a lot of like ROM hacks out there using the Super Mario assets where people have redesigned. I think there's one guy in particular that kind of coined it, and he made like three, I believe, Super Mario World Kaizo games, and those are when you see people like juggling shells and jumping off, doing spin jumping off blades, and throwing the shell against the wall only to catch it again and jump, and like do the
Mm-hmm.
most perilous feats of Mario platforming ever known to man. Those are Kaizo Mario, and like that's a whole genre of game on its own.
Yeah.
It's like people who are stupid good at Mario and can do that. Like I've tried, like I've gone like Super Mario Maker and played like Kaizo levels, and holy crap, I cannot bring myself to get that good at Mario. But I mean, there's dudes speed running that crap. You know what I mean? Not only are they like memorizing every freaking crazy move, but they're like speed running that.
Oh yeah.
So that's insane that legacy was left behind from Super Mario, and we already talked about Super Mario Maker. So I
Yeah, it
mean,
kind of
huge.
defined having a mascot for a system as well.
Mhm.
Mario became like the definite. I think that game cemented him as the 100% mascot for Nintendo from that point forth.
Definitely, and like I think Mario's a household name. Like whether or
Yeah.
not you know what video gaming is, like your mom's like, "Are you guys playing Nintendo again? Are you guys playing
Hmm.
Mario?" Like your grandma who's like seen a video game once knows who Mario is. You
Absolutely.
know, people have Mario merchandise everywhere. Like it's I would say Mario isn't only like just the mascot for the console, but Mario is like the mascot for video games.
Yeah,
Like almost like
I
it's
would
it's
agree.
it's just crazy the legacy there, and that's due in part also to the first few Mario games being huge successes. But yeah, I think this definitely cemented that. Like the other games on this list, this is considered one of the greatest video games of all time, not just the Super Nintendo.
Yes.
Like this is a game I can play at any point. Like this game is just fun always with a friend. I love the co-op of this game. Um, and I can't really say comparisons wise that there's not anything like it. I think platforming
In
it
general.
has just been around. That's just what video games were,
Hmm.
because it's the easiest thing to accomplish is to get through the level and jump around on hard platforms. But I think this is the cream of the crop. Like when you are thinking about designing a platforming video game, like this is the template you use. Like, is my
Hmm.
game a good game? Like, is this game like Super Mario World? Like, is it tight and responsive? Like that's kind of what I would strive for. Is like the perfect platforming game. Is this game?
Absolutely. I think this, starting with this game from the future forth, became the benchmark as far as platformers. If you want to make an innovative, fun, and across the board good game, I don't think you can beat Super Mario World. Plus, I mean, like you said, it's accessible to everyone. I'd have to put it on number one on the list of probably best or at least most inspirational games of all time, just because
Yeah.
it really did establish and, like you said, made video games a household name by having Mario be the mascot of that.
So I have to ask you then. I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I think we need to know Super Mario World or Super Mario 3. What's higher on your list?
Ooh. So I spent a lot of time with Super Mario 3, and you can tell they put a lot of money behind that one too. Because I even saw the movie they came out with called The Wizard.
The Wizard, that's where they premiered Super Mario 3 in North
They
America.
did, and they leaked one of the secrets in there, one of the secret flutes,
Hmm.
how to get it by holding down on the white block, which
Hmm.
is another great, age-old Mario secret. But when I saw that game, I really was changed, as far as just what a game could achieve, because that one has a world map. You go through each area. You can skip worlds by using secrets. Um, but then when I played Super Mario World, that one's clearly the winner in my eyes, only because graphically and the capacity of the system itself. There's far more secrets, far more to do, far more hidden uh, things. There's a lot of changes. Anytime you beat a level, the aesthetics of the world around you alters to reflect that. They just hit a home run across the board, even compared to Mario 3, in my opinion.
Hmm. I would have to agree with you. I mean, I don't think it's something to be considered lightly. Like, I have so many fond memories of Super Mario 3.
Hmm.
Um, that's probably the one I played the most as a kid.
Hmm.
NES was my first console, and I played the crap out of it. And it's just that's one of those games where like there's stuff in my head that I don't even know how they got there. Like I can't tell you how I learned where all the warp whistles were and where to
Yeah,
get those secrets, but like that's something I'll take to my grave. It's like
yeah.
knowledge that's just there forever. So I mean, I love that game. I mean, the presentation of that one's super cool. Like kind of how it's like a play format. The
Hmm.
graphics really, like you said, push the system at the time being an end of life NES game. But I think that's what like the hype behind that game, that game selling so many millions of copies is what kind of drove the fire behind Nintendo to really create another, huge hit with Super Mario World. And they just delivered. They were able to deliver on that hype and create a game
Hmm.
that was, in fact, like it met all those standards left by Super Mario World 3. So I say I agree with you in Super Mario World um, being the best game in my opinion, only because everything they do kind of different and better, leading into the Super Nintendo with the resources they had and the additional 8 bits of console power that they could use. So I would say yeah. It's such a hard argument for me, seeing like does this game belong as number one above A Link to the Past on the list of
Hmm.
all time greatest Super Nintendo games. I mean, I'm a huge Zelda fanboy. Like that's my probably my all-time favorite series. Dark Souls being a close second, which is, in my opinion, Dark Souls exists because Legend of Zelda. You
Agreed.
know, but I think I played this game more growing up, and I just have more nostalgia and more connection to the Super Nintendo with this game. Like when I think about the quintessential Super Nintendo game, like this is it.
Hmm.
Like Super Mario World is it. So it almost pains me to say, but this game I think beats out A Link to the Past as
All
the
right.
number one Super Nintendo game of all time.
Well, look at that.
So yeah, I don't know your thoughts on that, but I'm ready to put this on number one.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is the most iconic, and it's just across the board, just very well done.
So I guess after today's episode, the first episode of the Retro Radio Rumble, we can say that we would rate Super Mario World as the best Super Nintendo game.
Hmm.
Number two, being closely followed, is A Link to the Past,
Hmm.
and number three being Super Metroid.
Agreed.
So starting with the classics here, there's some huge games. Kind of interesting starting at the top of the list here. I've seen other platforms start at the bottom, but I thought it'd be fun to start from the top. So it's going to be a lot of fun arguments, I think, from here on out about
Yes,
where games go on the list, because now personal preference comes into play,
you're right.
which is a big thing. And here, I'm pulling up the list of games right now to see where we should go next week's episode. It definitely varies from here on out. Like I think the top three are pretty much unanimously these three games, but then it kind of takes a turn for RPGs. I think another thing that the Super Nintendo really excelled at are my favorite genre of game, and that is the RPG game.
Agreed.
So I think next week we can talk about some other stuff on the top of the list, which looks to be Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, which was released in North America as Final Fantasy III, and Earthbound.
All right.
So I think those three games will have an RPG centric episode next week for the Retro Radio Rumble. So with that, that'll be all for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Definitely appreciate anyone who's decided to stop by and give this a listen. If you've made it this far, thank you so very much for listening to these two dudes just talk about something they love, and that is old school video games. So until next week, thank you all very much. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening to the Retro Radio Rumble. Just wanted to get it out there that you can follow us on Twitter at rumble_retro, as well as like us on Facebook at facebook.com/retro.radio.rumble. Or better yet, leave us a review on iTunes. All these things really help us get out there, and we would appreciate it. Once again, thank you very much for listening.